Hello, thank you for listening to the NextGen Planners podcast. Just a note to add before this episode to give you some extra context. This episode of the podcast was recorded as part of our massive CPD Light Year in a Day event. This was where NextGen Planners ran 11 streams of content for 7 hours in each stream. We had a whole host of fabulous guests, and we can't wait for you to hear these brilliant conversations. Enjoy.
Welcome to the NextGen Planners podcast. NextGen Planners is a financial planning community with a supportive membership that strives for inclusion and shares best practice throughout our profession and the industry as a whole. This podcast is designed to support your always learning mentality by gathering insights from inside and outside of financial services. So sit back and enjoy.
Welcome to your fourth session of the day for your CPD Light Year in a Day. I hope you have all had some brilliant mornings listening to some fantastic speakers, and this next session will be no different. So we are on the NextGen Planners podcast stream, and I'm talking to loads of different brilliant people today, and the person I am talking to right now is financial advisor at Beckett Investment Management, Anthony West. Welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So today our kind of session, our chat is titled Success, Sanity and Satisfaction, which I think is a nicely broad kind of topic to look at all the different things that come into play when being a financial planner and what it looks like and what this life involves. So to kick things off then, could you give me a bit of an idea of what a day in your life looks like?
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit different at the moment because while I'm sort of relatively new at Beckett's, it's not packed full of client meetings, which it will be in time. So there is a bit of variety at the moment, but I'm making sure I use these spare gaps of time that I've got to sort of put it to good work. So my CPD for the year is way ahead. I'm pretty done, which is great. So I don't have to worry about that, which is good. But yeah, I guess typically for me, it's going into one of the offices, be it in Bury or in Ipswich, and really the first thing I'm doing each morning is looking at my emails. And really kind of sorting out the wheat from the chaff, lots of marketing stuff and things I don't need to worry about, get rid of those, and then look at what's in there. And from that and any hangovers from the previous day, kind of figure out what my to-do list looks like for the day. So for me, being organised for each day and kind of having a list of what I want to achieve in that day is really important. And kind of linking back to the title of it all, keeps my sanity in check for sure.
Definitely.
So yeah, the to-do list is really important sort of start of the day. After that, I then do my social media bits. So I will jump onto LinkedIn and have a look through there, see if there's anything that I've missed, any networking opportunities from connections I've got on there. So having a look at that and kind of keeping up with what's going on in the world, looking at different news articles as well, for stuff that might come up from clients for that day particularly. And kind of once all that stuff's done and, I'm onto the to-do list. So generally you're going to have something in there to do with client meetings, either what's happening that day or stuff I want to prepare for the next day maybe. We do a lot of client meeting notes. So rather than, we do all the suitability reports and stuff like that, which are very important, but we do give to clients meeting notes after each meeting. And although you can send them out up to 2 weeks after the meeting, I like to get them done while they're fresh in my mind. So get all the little bits and pieces noted down and typed up, saved on our systems, emailed out to the client, so they're kind of up to speed with everything. So I mean they're kind of the key things. If there's any gap at the moment, I'm actually doing a fair bit of studying, which is good, but a little bit annoying because it's stuff I've already qualified in. I've just got to do it for a different exam body. So any gaps, I'm trying to fit studying bits and pieces in as well.
Busy then, busy. Lots of things going on, and to try and to fill in kind of people who are listening. Then, is you mentioned you're still quite new. Do you want to kind of give a little background of to what you are new to, and where you were before, and what that looks like.
Yeah, no worries. So I've been with Beckett since March this year, and I'm a financial planner with Beckett. So the focus is on clients and giving them advice. Prior to Beckett's, I was working for a company called Matthew Douglas Limited, based in Suffolk as well. And I've been with Matthew Douglas for 11 years by the time I left. When I started there, I was an administrator, quite a small business at that point, and worked my way through to being a financial advisor, financial planner. And then in 2016, also became a director of the firm. And ultimately, what happened for me was at the beginning of 2022, and we've sort of spoke about this sort of previously, was that I had a change in my role because of a period of anxiety that I had. And that was really kind of triggered from just having too many plates that I was spinning as an advisor, but also as a director. And so the guys at Matthew Douglas were really good in accommodating the changes that I needed to make. And so I focused on my director responsibilities and let the client stuff go, and had to pass the clients over to other advisors. Last year was then doing a lot of the business stuff, but it was kind of almost like being a sub on the bench when you're seeing all the other guys going out, and particularly, advising your old clients as well. You're looking at it and thinking, that's ultimately where my passion lies. It's what my qualifications are all in. And so conversations were then had with the guys at Beckett's, and they said, look, we want you to come over and focus on the advisor role. They're a bigger organisation, so compliance, investment management, marketing, operations, all that stuff is dealt with by other people. And so it's nice to then go and focus on the advisor role. Yeah.
So it's been quite the tumultuous kind of journey then. It hasn't been exactly a straight kind of transition from one thing to the next. It's kind of been going with what you feel is the right thing to do at different points. And I mean, luckily ending up in a good position now in a role that you're really happy with. But what was that process like? Did it feel hard to kind of, in this very a financial planning world where there's so much good news stories and I'm doing this and I'm doing this, was it hard to kind of look at your priorities and choose what was right for you in that kind of landscape?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest things that I had to kind of get comfortable with was the fact that on my business cards previously, it said director. And, I think there's a lot of weight that's put to that title. And to be fair, when I became a director, I was massively proud about it as well.
Yeah.
It'd taken a lot of work to get to that point. And so in moving over to Beckett's, I essentially lose that title. And I remember mentioning it to my son. I mean, he's only 6, but he was like, "Oh, Dad, you're a boss," and I was like, "Yes, Tom, I was a boss, but I'm moving to a new job, and I'm not going to be one of the bosses." And he was like, "Well, why are you doing it then?" In his mind, it was like, "Well, wait a minute, it's a demotion almost," and that was definitely something to kind of get overcome in my head. And ultimately, it's a word on a bit of paper. It doesn't, being a director doesn't define who I am. Being a financial planner doesn't define who I am, and that was certainly something that kind of came to light last year for me with the anxiety and all this, the sort of journey through that and changing companies, was to say, no, look, who am I and what's important to me? Well, family comes first for me. And yeah, I was definitely guilty of previously kind of putting career and job title and all that stuff ahead of what really was important to me, which was roof over our head, wife and son being happy and healthy. The rest of it is then comes after that.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes financial planners can be, it's harder for them to take their own advice, where you might sit down with a client and you say, well, look, what are your priorities? How do you feel about these things? How can we create a life that is best for you and helping you achieve the things that you want to achieve? Yet then you reflect sometimes upon, how much you might be dedicating to your own work and really where are your priorities and what are the things that where should they sit? So I think it's a really important story to kind of bring forward to recognize that within the profession, we need to make sure that we're checking in with ourselves as well as checking in with our clients.
Absolutely, yeah, and like you say, the job can be almost clinical. Certainly, from a paper and a process sort of side of things, you can be quite clinical in how you like to follow that. And I like to be quite analytical and process driven. But obviously, there's a lot of emotional stuff you talk about with clients. But you then, you're trying to think through that and think with logic. But when you then get home and you have a 6-year-old having a tantrum, or whatever, quite quickly. For me at home, that stuff then goes out the window. Logic and all that just disappears, and you're almost sort of then dealing with what's in front of you. So yeah. I mean, one of the things I did do as part of the job change, which was really good for me, was actually doing my own cash flow plan. I did that previously, and so knew where I wanted to be. And obviously, remuneration and bits and pieces change when you move companies. So redoing that at Beckett's was good. But also one of the things I kind of changed in that was then losing the mindset of whatever's disposable, save and invest the whole lot, give myself a budget for pocket money, and God, I've got to stick within that. I've flipped it round the other way and said, right, I know what lifestyle I want in future. So what amount do I need to save for that? And then not restricting myself to a set budget each month for social spending and all that sorts of stuff, kind of giving myself a bit of leeway. And, if at the end of the month there's still a bit left, great. Well, that can go into savings at that point. But, as long as I've kind of done the minimum, then I can get the balance right between, yes, what's important for the future, but actually then enjoying what's here and now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, retrospectively, it seems like, well, I was feeling like this, so I did this, and then that was good, and I worked on this. But I can imagine it was just the process of moving firms is not always an easy one. So was there anything kind of in particular as part of that surprised you, that you didn't expect to encounter from moving from, a firm that you've been very established in to a new firm in a new position?
I think it certainly didn't surprise me how good the guys at Matthew Douglas were when I went to them and said that this is it. This is here's my notice ultimately, and this is where I'm going, and these are the reasons why. They were very supportive of that. And I did expect that after 11 years, because it was very much a family orientated firm, and I was kind of part of that family. So that didn't surprise me too much, which was good. The thing that did surprise me was, I think really for me was the emotional kind of hangover from it, because, being through different relationships in your life, with boyfriends or girlfriends, whatever it may be. And, when relationships end in a personal capacity, it's kind of like, you split up, and it's kind of deteriorated to a point, and you split up, and then it's, unless you're kind of in a marriage or whatever, it's going to be a pretty clean break and fairly quick. My notice period was 3 months. So I handed my notice in, and there was 3 months of kind of, living with someone that I'd broken up with almost.
Yeah.
And it was amicable as well. So it's not like, I can look back on that relationship and think of a lot of nasty stuff and, kind of lose that attachment and straight into Beckett's and think, right, here's the new relationship, onto a rebound or whatever. It's not been like that. And so, managing that kind of emotional side of it was definitely the surprise to me. And yeah, I mean, that's probably been the hardest thing, because, I still miss the guys at Matthew Douglas, and I still miss that business from the fact that it very much, I had a big impact on it, and it's, that's kind of like another kid in a way.
Yeah.
So it is, there's still that emotional attachment to a degree there. But the good thing with Beckett's particularly is that, everyone there's been so welcoming and supportive, that it has made that, starting this new relationship and kind of, getting into the culture and focusing on this new path, that has definitely helped.
Amazing. And so obviously having this time with Matthew Douglas and working out, where you need to be prioritizing things and how to approach things in order to be, happy within yourself and within your life, and having all those pieces fit together. Were there certain things you had in mind that you wanted to approach differently? Were there different strategies that you had when joining Beckett's, a new company? You thought, actually, I'm going to set this boundary. I'm going to make sure I do this more so that I'm protecting myself, and I'm making sure that I'm on the right track. It's
Yeah, I'll definitely. No, that's fine. I mean, one of the things I was guilty of at Matthew Douglas, and like I say, putting work before family, or even myself, absolutely, I did that. And I look back at it and think, oh, that was, was that the right thing to do? Well, ultimately, yes, because it's helped get me to the point that I am now, and there was a lot of sort of experience that I got from how hard I worked, and that was literally in terms of like the hours I'd be doing. So Matthew Douglas actually were very good with flexibility. No one was over my shoulder watching what I was doing every day. And I could have used that flexibility, but I didn't. It was thinking, no, right, I've gone and, did a late evening yesterday. All right, well, do you know what? I'm going to be sort of take an extra hour or two in the morning for myself. I never did that. I just cracked on straight into the next day. Beckett's are very good with flexibility as well, and I think from a lot of companies that that I speak to, flexibility is really important on their agenda. I think it's kind of almost more important than the going down to like a 4-day week. They'd rather actually just embrace flexibility more. So one of the things I've kind of set myself really is that I'm not necessarily claiming back all of the additional hours I do with like networking events, which tend to be in the evenings, or even client meetings that are in the evening. I'm not, being very clinical and saying, right, I did 2 hours extra that night, so I'm getting 2 hours extra that day. But for example, Monday, I've got my son's sports day coming up in the afternoon. I've booked out time to go to my son's sports day. And I know it's okay. I don't need to ask permission for it because Gavin, my line manager, is very good with this stuff. When I first joined, I was asking him and kind of getting a feel of what's allowed. But he said, look, as long as the job is done, and as long as clients have still got the relationship, then you use that flexibility, and I trust you to not take the mick out of it, but to get that balance. So I'm just being more mindful of that. It's hard to kind of set a strict rule about what it's going to look like, but it's just kind of going with the flow of it. And like I say, sports day on Monday, I'll be there hopefully in the sunshine.
Yeah, hopefully in the sunshine with the egg and spoon race and the beanbag. Do they still do all of those things? Is that what a 6-year-old sports day is?
They didn't last year, so I'm hoping they don't this year. I might not be the quickest at that, to be fair.
But like that's the point, isn't it? And this is why we're in this profession, is to help people live better lives that are going to be filled with the things that are important to you. And it feels strange that often the advisor themselves is not included in that narrative, in that conversation. But going back to the client a second, how did you find kind of transitioning from these longer term clients to starting again? What was that process like for you? Did it change how you set up your relationships with clients? Did you look at what you did before and make any changes, or did you approach it in much the same way?
There's certain things that you approach in the same way because no matter which firm you're working for, they're going to be the same things, and absolutely regulation is going to kick in and say, well, these are the minimum things that we need you to know as well. I think the thing that I've changed in coming over to Beckett's, and it kind of fits more in with their process, is that the initial chats with clients are definitely led more on their objectives and what value we can potentially offer as advisors. So there is much more of kind of this informal sort of chat at the start to see whether or not actually we are the right fit for this client and whether or not a relationship can build up. Whereas at Matthew Douglas would kind of lead in with the fact find, and you'd want to kind of then, you'd spend quite a bit of time questioning about, current circumstances and bits and pieces like that. You'd introduce the company and so on and so forth. But I think with Beckett, it is kind of more front-loaded on the objectives and what they want to achieve and where we can add value and what we're likely to charge for that. And it's kind of then, it's very much kind of being like a gatekeeper, because, I've had some conversations with prospective clients where they're saying, oh, well, no, I don't really want a financial plan. I want the advice when I want it. And actually, I don't really value a long-term relationship with someone. They almost want someone to be reactive to when they want it. And that's not really kind of the way we're set up. We want to have those long-term relationships, focus it around financial planning, because, if someone's just coming to you to say, oh, can you just go and stick such and such in an ISA and I'm going to pick my own funds? It's like, well, why do you need me advising that to you then?
Yeah.
You might as well go direct, because you're always going to begrudge paying me, an initial fee or something like that to do this for you, which is an administration exercise. And, the wonders of technology now means that you can go and do these things very quickly online, especially if you're picking your own funds and stuff like that. But yeah. So, I mean, there's been a bit of a change. One of the things I'm absolutely mindful of is about working with people that want to work with an advisor as well. Because one of the problems you can get when you're starting off, I've got no clients against my name as such at Beckett's. It was a clean slate. One of the pitfalls that you can get into is that you become, you want to be everything to everyone, just so you can kind of get your numbers up. And then suddenly you realize that, X many years down the line, you've got 100 odd clients, and wait a minute, the people that haven't got a lot with you are taking up more of your time than the wealthier people and paying you more, because you promised them everything just so that you could get them on board. And I'm mindful of not falling down that sort of that pitfall, really.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you kind of alluded to the fact that, different firms, there's different cultures, isn't there? And there's different priorities. How did it feel? I guess you were kind of involved in setting up the culture in Matthew Douglas. How did it feel kind of settling in? And do you feel like was that an important thing that you sought out, or did you feel like you could, bring your own stamp to a different firm that perhaps was different? So,
I mean, one of the benefits with certainly moving over to Beckett's was that I already knew about the firm, a fair bit about the firm as well. So when I was at Matthew Douglas, I'd always keep an eye on essentially who were the main competitors locally. I always thought that was quite important. It wasn't necessarily that a client would say, oh, well, I'm looking to get advice from you and Beckett's, and you'd be kind of put against each other. We didn't really get that too much. What it tended to come down to was understanding for professionals, particularly, the solicitors and accountants that we were all trying to network with, what was, for me, it was all about what was Matthew Douglas's unique position against Beckett's, against, other local firms. So I'd already, knew who they were, understood the in-house investment proposition that there is, things like that, go along to sort of like, advisor networking or retreat events. And I'd see Ian, who's our CEO at Beckett's, I'd see him at certain events, and, we'd always have a chat. And that always helped me kind of get an understanding of what the company was like. Because, ultimately, if the guy at the top of the pyramid, if you like, can, you can have a nice conversation with, and, with just the way that it goes, you kind of pick up an idea of, well, yeah, that's a nice place to work for. The other thing with Beckett's, I mean, they've got Great Place to Work for awards. They've got the B Corp status. There's lots of bits and pieces there that, help to give me an idea of, do you know what, this is the culture of that place. This is what they're putting as a priority. And does that fit with the way that I like to work? And thankfully it does, which is good. So yeah, there's not been too much of a culture change, I'd say. If you really boil it down to what's really important to me, it was, do they want to look after the staff? Absolutely, Beckett's do. Matthew Douglas did. Do they put clients first? Both companies did. So there's not really been too much of a culture shift, which is good.
Yeah, I can imagine so. After, it's a time that if things were different, perhaps you might not have left Matthew Douglas. So it's a situation that is, you have to try and find somewhere that is going to match a lot of those things that you valued before. And so due to the nature of how you have moved, do you have advice for people who perhaps are feeling particularly overwhelmed? They're feeling, that it's quite tricky to balance everything in their job, in their workload. What kind of advice might you say to someone who's maybe feeling isolated about that?
The best thing you can do is speak to someone. It really is, and it can be really hard to do that within a business. It's important to do it within the business, though, because one of the first things I did when I was, feeling uncomfortable was that I did go and speak to the other directors straight away. And they were very good at understanding that, and then helping figure out what the solution looked like. And, in 2022, that was then handing over clients and focusing on the director role. But yeah, speaking to someone is really important. It does help if you can speak to someone in the business, because ultimately that's someone that can help come up with a solution to how you're feeling. For me, I also went and spoke to a therapist outside of work. And I would recommend doing that as well. So kind of speaking to someone, yes, in-house, but absolutely speak to someone outside of the business. So the lady I spoke to was a psychologist, but also a life coach as well. And so that did help. It wasn't necessarily that she was there saying, yeah, leave Matthew Douglas, get over to Beckett's. It wasn't that at all. But she was really trying to understand what was important to me. And I just think in the way that they ask questions, you almost answer the questions yourself. They don't give you solutions at all, but they'll ask the right questions to help you figure it out. And, and that's the right way to do it, because it sticks more. But yeah, definitely reaching out and speaking to people. Now, it's not easy to do that, to speak to a professional in healthcare, with mental health. I know whenever I've looked at that in the past, I got told it was like a 6-week delay on the NHS and all this stuff. I think that's even longer now, to be honest. And it's one of those things where it's like the thought of waiting 6 weeks was like, I can't do that. There's no way I could have waited 6 weeks. So I was very fortunate to be in the position where I could afford to go and speak to Hannah, who was the lady I spoke to and pay for her privately. I mean, it was £70 an hour, so it's not cheap. And I was at the start doing that an hour every week. So, £240 a month soon, stacked up. But I was very fortunate to be in the position that I could do that. If the NHS can't do it, then you've absolutely got other charities that can do it as well. So you've got things like Samaritans that you can reach out at any point. But local to us in Suffolk, we have Suffolk Mind. So there's lots of organisations nationally that would be there for you to reach out, and talking to someone that you don't know makes a massive difference, because we all hold something back in real life. Absolutely. And it might be because you don't want to be honest with yourself, or you've got a persona that you've got to maintain, or whatever it may be. Speaking to someone that doesn't know anyone else that you do, and is going to keep it confidential and isn't going to judge you for saying it, that really does help.
Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, thank you so much for being so candid and honest about that, because I think that is what becomes one of the main barriers, isn't it, to encountering or seeking that kind of help, is because it feels still slightly taboo, especially in an industry that is, unfortunately, it's still quite male. It's still quite, there's not so much talk. I mean, it is changing, but there's not so much conversational dialogue around those sorts of topics and how we're feeling. So to be able to bring that kind of to the forefront and say, well, it happens. Of course it happens. We're humans. We're in a profession that can be very demanding, and we just have lives, and they get in the way sometimes. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I guess on top of the seeking help from somebody who's genuinely trained to be able to help that for you, talking to someone in your business sounds very important. How can people in a business facilitate an environment where their staff feel comfortable enough coming to them when they start to feel that way?
It's a hard one, because particularly for me at Matthew Douglas, the first person that I spoke to about it wasn't necessarily Matt, who the company's named after. It wasn't necessarily Matt. Quite a lot of people at Matthew Douglas were going to speak to Mark, another director. But it's just his way, his persona kind of thing is very much that people can, feel like he's very approachable. And, I think that's probably the big thing thinking about it, is that if you're a manager or you're leading a team particularly, you can come across as being, right, this is what we've got to get done, come on, and you crack the whip and so on and so forth. And God, you need to do that, definitely. But for Mark, it was always very much that you could have a conversation with him, and you didn't necessarily think that at the end of that conversation that he was going to be then saying, right, well, these are the action points from the meeting. It wouldn't necessarily be very formal. And I think that's probably one of the things, if you're leading a team, is open yourself up to having conversations. And the important thing is don't have solutions from them, kind of thing. You know, if you're having a chat, particularly the thing for me is that I hated when I sort of feeling the anxiety at its worst, was that if you spoke to someone, so like if I spoke to my wife about it, I didn't want her to come up with a solution. So if I was saying, oh, Kate, you know, I'm thinking of this, I'm worried about this, her to then say, well, don't worry about this. Well, this is what you need to do to fix that. You don't necessarily want that. You just want to share you just want to talk it through. So it's probably a good idea equally for, you know, someone that's leading a team, just to kind of be open to having conversations, but don't get focused on thinking, right, what have I got to do out of this? What actions have we got to set out of this? Yes, that's great from the business meetings, but when you're doing a person meeting, just have a chat. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of those skills should be things that financial planners are good at, because, you know, you're going into meetings where you want to find out about the people that are in front of you. You want to understand them. You want to get to the bottom of what's important. And so really these listening skills, this empathy, if it could just be extended and a little bit more to the rest of the team as well, then perhaps that would make a difference.
And particularly, like you say, I think for a lot of advisors, we have a lot of good questioning skills, so there's no problem with that. And you can talk to clients. That's a fundamental skill of a financial planner, absolutely. But we are so used to coming out of a meeting and having a to-do list from it, having to come up with solutions, because the clients come to you with a problem and you are then going to put it right, kind of thing, or work with them to put it right. And I think when you're talking to someone, that's confiding in you, you almost want to do the questioning bit that you can do so well, and then forget the other bit about the planning aspect of the job, about the solution coming up with, all that. Just forget that bit and kind of almost let the person do it themselves. And that's definitely what I found from speaking to a therapist, was that, you know, she wasn't at the end of the meeting saying, right, here's your to-do list, Tony. You know, these are the things you need to do to fix yourself. It wasn't that at all. The whole thing was around her just asking questions. Essentially with her asking the right questions, I was kind of giving myself the solutions, which was pretty good.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You know, if we kind of boil it down, we know kind of what we should be doing or what we need. But if your brain is just too busy and it's too stressful and there's too much stimulus happening all at once, then it's really hard to kind of decipher that. So to be able to have someone to just calmly kind of work out some things and go, okay, well, no, this is right, and I do think I should do this, then hopefully, you know, you can feel empowered to make those changes yourself, because ultimately it's your life. It's you who has to live it and make sure that you're doing the right things for you. So I guess when we're looking at not wanting to have solutions and just having a conversation where someone will just nod and go, that sounds hard, and I hear you, that that's a tricky thing to be dealing with. Do you think there should be people in the business who are trained for that? Do you think it should just be everybody having more collective responsibility for each other? What do you think that should or could look like?
It's a bit of a hard one, really, because I think it depends on the size of the firm, to be honest. If you've got a smaller firm, then it's going to help if everyone is mindful of it. And so one of the things that Beckett's does when you join is that you go on to a Suffolk Mind workshop. Every member of staff goes onto it. Unfortunately, I've missed mine. So I say every member of staff goes onto it, everyone -1 at the moment. But I have got it booked in. So you go on that, and it is about, that whole session is about understanding yourself and the way that your mind works. And it actually works really well, because then everyone at the company has been through this and has looked at themselves and then used those skills and that knowledge to then think about the conversations they're having with their colleagues, which is really good. I think you certainly find in very large companies that, you know, they'll have like a mental health first aider. And I think that is a good thing to have, but you want to make sure that the problem with that is that you, from a business perspective, that you say, great, well, we've got 1,000 employees and look, we've got 10 mental health first aiders. Great. We're aware of mental health. Well, what if out of those 1,000 employees or 990 other employees, they don't get along with those 10, or they don't trust those 10 because maybe they're too senior for them or whatever? You're not necessarily going to open up and want to have that conversation. You know, that's, I think it's a good thing if you can kind of have I love the way Beckett's do it. You know, they get everyone that comes in and they go on this workshop. Fantastic, because everyone's kind of singing from the same page and everyone at least has had that foundation of kind of sort of knowledge or experience to then take forward.
Absolutely. And I mean, it sounds like a great kind of initiative to just make that compulsory and everybody, you know, have to have that grounding in understanding these things. And ultimately, if you do have employees that feel comfortable coming to you, you know, that it feels like if someone says something that is worrying, they're not going to panic and suddenly be like, oh no, what do I do? And is it an uncomfortable situation? How do I react? You know, it's an open space. Ultimately, people are going to feel supported and want to stay. And not that that's the main reason why you should do these things. You know, we're just human and we should be there to support each other and, you know, make sure, you know, other people are okay if they're not. But I guess even just from a business perspective, it has positive effects of you know, building that sense of a team and people who support each other and an environment that you would want to stay in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everyone at Beckett's has been so welcoming and so supportive. You know, one of my fears in joining the company was that, you know, would everyone kind of look at it and think, oh, right, here's a guy that's been very senior at another company. He's going to kind of swan in and so on and so forth. And, you know, do we have to treat him a certain way because, you know, there's preconceived ideas of what I'm going to be like or anything like that. And there's been none of that at all. You know, no matter what business department they're in, you know, you sit in the staff break room and you just get a conversation going with whoever. People are naturally interested about, oh, right, so, you know, what was it like, you know, making a change over, Tony, and all this sort of stuff. And yeah, there's been no prejudice. There's been no conflict in it at all. I haven't felt uncomfortable at any point. And when I've needed help on things like understanding IO, you know, that's their back office system. That's not the one that Matthew Douglas used. So I am like a beginner using IO. And there hasn't been anything of anyone saying, well, right, he used to be a director at an IFA firm. He should know how to use IO. There's been none of that at all. Everyone's been, oh, right, yeah, no worries. I'll show you how to do this. And that's been fantastic. That's been really helpful.
I mean, that's lovely to hear. And hopefully that is, you know, it's how we should be running businesses, isn't it? Not being judgmental and helping where we can. But from where you were, obviously you were a director of a firm and now you're kind of starting, not again, but, you know, it's a new chapter of that journey. What do your goals and ambitions look like, and have they changed from what they were?
So, I mean, goals and ambitions really for me is absolutely kind of, you know, getting my, from a commercial perspective, absolutely is kind of getting a certain number of clients under my belt. You know, there is kind of, you know, a bit of an AUM kind of target that I've got. It's not that Beckett's have necessarily set it for me, but I do just kind of have one myself, but I'm not trying to be led by that because I don't want to fall foul of, you know, doing something just because I want to get a sale. You know, the day I become that guy is the day I'm not fit for the industry, sort of thing. So I've got a sort of a mindset of where I want to be, particularly by the end of the year. Ultimately, for me, it's about having those right outcomes for the clients first and foremost. But yeah, there's a bit of a sort of a focus on that, and particularly with professional connections. For me, one of the things that I want to certainly have by the end of the year is professionals that, you know, I've built up a strong, trusting relationship with. And that's already happened as a carryover from Matthew Douglas, because those connections carry on. So yeah, it's just sort of building that profile, building that presence. And so if I can kind of get to the end of the year, have a handful of clients under my belt, and have some really good trusting network sort of connections, then fantastic. That would be job done by the end of the year kind of thing. And then it's then into next year, then thinking, right, keep on building on from that.
Nice. No, it sounds brilliant. I look forward to seeing what happens in that trajectory. But as we're kind of moving on with time, there's a couple of questions that we like to ask everybody with all of our guests on our NextGen Planners podcast. And the first one is, we like to ask people for a book that has helped them in their career. Do you have a book that you could recommend?
I do. It was hard because when sort of you said sort of before this about about this question, I was thinking, well, I love reading, and there's lots of books that I read. I have to say, I haven't really read many financial planner books or books about money, other than Bitcoin Billionaires. That was quite a good one.
Nice.
I wouldn't necessarily that would be my top of the list for what's been good to help me with the role though. So thinking about it. Phil Knight, the guy who's CEO started Nike, his book Shoe Dog. I'd actually say that's one of the books that is kind of top of my reading list. I've read it before. It's a really good one in the fact that you're looking at a business that we all look at now and think, billions and billions of pounds of turnover, massively famous and successful brand. Sports stars, under their branding and all this sort of stuff. And it's really interesting to read that book and see where Nike started and where Phil Knight himself started as essentially, trying to produce a decent running shoe because he was a track athlete in America. And, the journey that business went through, there was a sort of like a contract that he had in Japan with a manufacturer of shoes. That kind of went sour. And so he ended up kind of losing what he'd built to that point because, someone else, a bigger boy in the industry had kind of said, no, you can't do that. And it breached contract and off they went. So then starting Nike very much from, humble beginnings and the risks and, how they had to embrace uncertainty to then get the business to where it is now. And it's a great book to read when you're looking at stuff like that and thinking about your own life that, uncertainty is always going to be there, risk is always going to be there, and not thinking about it as a bad thing, but kind of thinking about it as an opportunity.
Yeah. When was Nike started? I don't actually know. Oh, you did?
A long time ago, yeah. What was it? Probably 70s, I think it was, something like that. Because one of the things that started with Nike, particularly in sort of California, was kind of like almost like this hippie sort of lifestyle and the way that they were in their office. They were kind of, preempted Google in that kind of, flexible kind of, lose the business suits sort of attitude, turn up in your shorts and T-shirt to work kind of thing. They were doing that decades before.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, that sounds like a great read. Okay, last question then. Question we ask everybody, big question. What are you most excited to see in the world of finance in the next 10 years?
Probably a controversial answer. It definitely would be AI. I've seen some ideas of how that could help financial planners in their job with cash flow systems, and the system that I looked at a couple of years ago, where you sort of build a cash flow model, and the AI in the background was then spitting out kind of a list of 15 things to think about for that client, and it was like, wow, that's great. And that I don't think that's necessarily a challenge to what I do, because the clients I'm working with particularly value the relationship that we have, and they want that sort of face-to-face relationship. But I think it's a great opportunity for the industry when it comes to compliance and stuff like that. A great opportunity when it comes to managing larger numbers of clients and kind of getting the accessibility of advice out there, or where people don't particularly want to pay to have a person sat in front of them, and that's a barrier to them getting financial advice. AI could be a great way to then say, right, well, here's a lower cost way of getting access to it. And we need that access to financial advice. We absolutely do. I don't look at the big solutions that are out there as a competitor to what I do. Actually, I think they're great for the industry, because the better financial education people can get, and the sooner they can get it, then that will make society better off anyway. So yeah, AI, really interested to see where that comes from.
And I guess that's one thing actually we haven't quite touched on this this episode is financial education is something that is very important to you and something that you're working towards. So just to kind of wrap up everything up from this episode, do you want to just have a quick word about why you think financial education is important to what people in what age group? And all of those kind of things.
Yeah, no worries. Financial education is massively important. I was fortunate in that when I was younger, my mum and dad ran a business from home. My dad was a landscape gardener. So, okay, how does that make a difference to financial education? Well, at home, you'd see checks coming in. You'd see paying in slips. You'd see my mum doing the books on the computer at night. And okay, I wasn't looking at that stuff, but you really got a sense of how important money was. And being organised with it. And unfortunately, not everyone is going to get that same upbringing. My mum and dad, particularly when I was younger, they stopped me buying certain cars and getting loans out to buy that car, which absolutely in hindsight was the right thing for them to tell me to do. If I didn't have them doing that and they'd let me just go ahead, who knows what my financial position would have been like now. So one of the things I do is quite regularly is go into schools and try and teach students just some fundamentals about money. What's good debt, what's bad debt? How do you manage that sorts of stuff? We all need a mortgage at some point in our life, unfortunately. But, that's fine. That's just part of it. And it's just then how do you manage that? Things like budgeting and stuff like that. It's really important. And I think that if people can have that better financial education sooner, that will make it a safer environment for them when they, then go and look at financial advice, because they'll be able to make more informed decisions and they'll be able to see the red flags. Maybe, you look at a lot of the stuff that, has gone wrong in the industry in the past, whether or not it be, PPI and bits and pieces like that. If people can be a bit more financially aware, then it's going to help protect the industry. I mean, the industry obviously needs to protect itself as well, and regulation is really important for that. But if you can have consumers kind of, understanding the ownership of their own decisions as well, then that helps to really kind of make it a belt and braces approach. And that should mean that naturally kind of enforces the trust in financial advisors. And if you can kind of get a bit of an equilibrium in terms of knowledge, it's not always good. We always need to kind of know more. Otherwise, what's the point of having an advisor? I don't want to do myself out of the job. But if, like I say, if people can kind of understand the basics of finance, then that absolutely helps. How could it not?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what a lovely way to wrap up that whole conversation. We could talk for longer, but it is, time to wrap up. So thank you so much for coming on here, sharing so much. I really appreciate it. I'm sure everybody who's listening does too. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.